I stumbled across Webflow a couple years back, and it was a great platform to start and utilize for building websites. I've used so many other ones before, but it by far really merged what I would consider design and development together quite beautifully. And so, yeah, as far as development background, I have a background in front end development, not back end. So any back end questions, I will not be able to answer. But for sure, front end or anything business related, design feedback, whatever it is, that's another big part of, I think, realistically starting that Slack channel. I'll go ahead and create a couple groups in there that allow us to post, design feedback back and forth in one particular project. And then, if anybody has questions about business in another project. So I'm going to get all that linked up and set up for everybody to hopefully start enjoying and get some good advice in specific topics that aren't just related to Webflow. And then of course Webflow design, stuff too. But ultimately, I think it'll be a good start. So with that being said,
what is the Slack channel? I don't think I saw anything about that.
Okay, so on let's see, I think it was the second post, and I think I commented on a couple of the other ones too, where I said this is happening at the top in the header. There's a link at the end of that is an invite to a Slack channel that you can join, and Cyan's actually on there as well. And so yeah, if you want to join that and hop on anytime throughout the week, we'll be able to kind of bounce back and forth and communicate, give feedback, whatever it might be, and get this thing rolling. So that should be good. And let me know if you can't find that too. I can always send it directly to you.
Okay, cool. Yeah, I should be able to find it on the Facebook group.
Perfect. So let me go ahead and I'm going to pull these questions back up that we have. So anyways, while I'm doing that, what about you guys? What's your background? How did you stumble across Webflow and the community, et cetera, et cetera?
Brian?
Yeah, so I think my journey has been kind of fairly similar to yours. I've been doing design for a while, I guess 6 or 7 years now.
Gotcha.
And kind of accidentally fell into it. But I'm kind of more specifically on the UI UX product design side of things.
Gotcha.
And so I discovered Webflow a couple of years ago, specifically for my side projects and portfolio site and things like that. And I also have kind of a front end background.
Okay.
So I approached a lot of the sort of WYSIWYG editors very skeptically. And just, seeing how it was actually kind of based around the box model and CSS principles and a lot of that other stuff, I was like, okay, this is actually onto something. It's not just a drag and drop that's
for sure
positioning everything or
right.
whatever all the other ones do. And so, since then I've kind of done similar stuff to that. I'm now doing contract freelance stuff.
Great.
And I've been for a couple of years, working mostly with SaaS startups.
Okay.
And then last year I launched a course on InVision Studio, specifically around motion design.
That's awesome. Yeah, Studio is a cool thing for sure.
Yeah, and so kind of definitely looking to kind of dig a bit more into Webflow. And kind of
share
some of that stuff with the list that I have that's kind of attached to the motion stuff as well.
Right. Well, and it's funny you say that, before Studio came out, a lot of people, well, still even, a lot of people haven't adapted Studio yet, but before Studio release, a lot of people would come to Webflow and use it for motion and kind of prototyping that way. I've seen a couple of posts even over the past year or so in that group about people trying to figure out how to do mobile prototypes and whatnot in Webflow. So it's interesting the process that we kind of see when it comes to start to finish and working with the client and how that's evolving. I know InVision Studio has been huge for me, especially at work, prototyping things and getting an idea of how things will move and function for the user. Super huge stuff. Of course, InVision Studio there for a little while had its own glitches and bugs and whatnot as the beta continued until like version 99 or something. So it was kind of crazy, but yeah, that's cool. Well, okay, what about you, Siam?
I'll keep it super short. I started a company about a year ago doing sales and marketing, and I was supposed to just do sales, but ended up doing a lot more of the marketing than I planned on. And
yeah.
In that process, I was looking for the best tools to optimize all my processes. And when it came to web design, when I looked at the landscape, Webflow far and away seemed like the best way to create an aesthetic website, aesthetic and functional,
right,
without having any sort of coding experience.
Yep.
And so I launched into it, and I love it. I've made a ton of sites, even though I don't have a background in it. And I can see the potential for it going forward. And so Webflow University is amazing, and it's a great way to get up and running with it, but it leaves a lot to be desired. There's a lot of gaps in there that people, I think, need help figuring out. And I think that's why, Austin, you had the response you had when you put out your poll,
right?
Because there's a lot of people looking for those answers, myself included.
Yeah, no, for sure. And that's the thing too, is a lot of times in that group, I see a lot of questions that people are asking that are even more design related than they are Webflow related. And a lot of times the process and the way that we can go about things as a front-end developer or front-end designer are substantial in helping move Webflow along and explain the concept of front-end development and how that is playing a role realistically in that platform. So for sure, I totally agree. And yeah, Webflow University is pretty cool. You know, I love watching. I don't know if you guys watched it. And for people that watch the recording afterwards, definitely go check out the Freelancer's Journey new playlist that they put out on YouTube and elsewhere. It is awesome. I think there were 43 classes, all of which average about 10 to 15 minutes long, but go a little bit more in depth as far as like start to finish designing a website for a client, how you contact clients and how you plan that out and price and everything. So yeah, it's pretty cool. But for sure, I agree with you, Sian. Like there are some gaps, and I think that oftentimes there are gaps in certain areas that people are kind of hesitant to answer because in some cases there's really no definitive answer, and then in others it's like, all right, well, you know, coming from a designer looking for that answer at times, I'm always like, all right, well, what do you do? What do you do? If you can't give me an answer on what I should do, how do you go about doing it? And so that's something that hopefully we can kind of pass those thoughts around, especially when I think the biggest one, to be honest, is pricing. A lot of people don't know how to price a website or price anything realistically. They're scared to go too low. They're scared to go too high. And I think, I mean, even though I've done it for years now, it's still scary every time I send that quote off to a client. I kind of, freaks me out a little bit. So for sure, it's a fear, but definitely let's go ahead. So we'll jump into those then. With that being said, a couple different questions. I know the biggest one was starting or planning a website and naming classes, et cetera, et cetera. So there are tons of models out there when it comes to like naming classes and how to go about that. But as far as starting a website, I'm going to take a little bit more of a designer approach to it. A lot of times what we do as Webflowers is we automatically want to jump into building on the platform, and in a way that can help save time for sure. But I kind of have a couple steps that I think will help us out and are definitely worth it in designing content that is focused for your users, opposed to just kind of freewheeling it and making something that looks pretty. Because that happens a lot, and even though it looks good and that might drive a lot of users, you want to get that conversion, whatever that conversion be. Maybe you want the user to watch a video, or you want the user to buy your product or sign up for the subscription box. I don't know, it just depends. So from start to finish, planning a website, I'm going to kind of limit it off here and move away from discussing with the client and everything, because I think that that's a whole other thing in and of itself. But as far as planning a website, I think the best place to start is with a pen and piece of paper. I know that's crazy, but to sit down and to write down, keywords and what's going on. So once you get your information from your client, you're kind of looking for content and everything. As far as that goes, you want to ask them key questions like, what's your end goal? What do you want your website to accomplish? Are you currently doing something in the physical world that you'd like to tie over to the digital world? That kind of stuff. And like I said, we'll get into more of the client-based side of things and how you go about interacting with them. But once you get your content all squared away, the best thing to do is analyze that content and build off of that content on a sheet of paper. So the first thing that I would do as far as planning a website is figure out how many pages you're going to have, right? And the best way to do that is to, obviously, you have to have an index page or home page. And you also have to decide whether or not the majority of the content is going to live on the home page or it's going to spread off. A lot of people create these parallax websites, and they're great, and having more content on a page does well on SEO, and it does well on interaction when it comes to the user being involved. But ultimately, you want to have those secondary pages as well to link to, even from those subsections on that parallax part of the web page, because that helps build your SEO. If Google's search bots, your crawlers come in and scan the website and they find one page, it's not going to do so well SEO wise, and it's not going to populate very well on any search engine. Obviously, I'm going to use Google a lot, and we have Bing and all kinds of other crap, but Google is the powerhouse for search. And so with that being said, figuring out how many pages you're going to have is kind of the crucial part of that. So I don't know, let's kind of talk this out, right? So Cyan, give me an example of and it doesn't even have to be related to anything you've done. What's a typical website business that would be started, or a client coming to you and saying, hey, this is what I want built out. You got any industry things?
Yeah, well, so I'll just give an actual example of something that we recently worked on, which was a coach who had a course or has a course that he wants people to go through, and also has a one-on-one practice.
Okay.
So his homepage is kind of like an introduction to his company.
Gotcha.
And it lists all the services that he offers. And then the subsequent pages are, this is my one-on-one coaching, sign up here. This is my course, this is what it's about, sign up here. And then a contact page. And then he has a blog, or not a blog, but a vlog where he does interviews with people.
Gotcha.
And he has a section with that.
Now, is that vlog free, or is that a paid subscription concept there?
It's free.
Okay, cool. And then ultimately, what's the conversion point? What is he trying to accomplish with the website?
Trying, to just have a presence with his one-on-one practice. I think he gets most of his clients in person. But the primary CTA that he's trying to push with the website is getting people to sign up for the course, because that scales really well online.
Right. No, that's great. And that's totally cool. A lot of people are, and that's why I asked that question. A lot of people automatically assume that their website has to quite literally do something, when in fact visibility, trust, and authority is really all that you need to establish in some cases for businesses. A lot of times I have clients who it's funny, they come to me and they say, I need a website. And then we get to talking, and then they ask me this question. It's hilarious. It happens 90% of the time. Wait, why do I need a website? And it's kind of funny, because they know that they need one. They came to me and said, hey, I need one. But they don't even really know why they need one, especially if there's no end result out of the website besides just putting content online. And people would be surprised at how much content and just putting stuff out there can really bring visibility to your company and to what you do. And then it also establishes trust and authority. And that's actually something that Webflow University mentions a lot in that freelance course, is talking about how realistically, if you think about it, what does every user nowadays do, or consumer across the board? They automatically look for a website, especially if they don't know the exact location that somebody is. They're going to look it up on Google. They're going to go to Google Maps. They're going to go to Waze or whatever it is, and they're going to look that kind of stuff up. So it's really important to establish that kind of stuff, and that's a great example. So specifically in that coaching business, obviously you said homepage. Typically when you have a free, like an entrepreneur like that, you would look at, having an about section to create a little bit more like trust. And the concept is that he's been doing this for years, or maybe I've seen the approach been taken the other way too, to where somebody doesn't have a lot of experience. So it's like, the question is, okay, how do I, as a startup, say, hey, we're worth it? And sometimes it boils down to background in the industry in other ways, and other times it just boils down to being a good person. So people will, put stuff like they volunteer, or they do this, or they do that, and this is how they stumbled across it, and they have the motivation that a lot of companies look for when it comes to building their business. They want somebody that's motivated and that's going to take the time. Unfortunately, a lot of companies expect you to, if they call you at 9 o'clock in the morning, or if they call you at 3 o'clock, in the morning, but at night, they expect you to answer the phone or whatever it is. So they're looking for that kind of person that has that drive and wants to focus on their business. So for sure, I think that's great. So home, about, contact, for sure. That, vlog is great. And then on contact page, so is this a project, I know that this is something directly related to you, is this a project that has already been started, has already been completed, is in the talks of?
Started.
Okay, so it's been started. So about, like, I know that this is kind of loose, but about how far in the process are you? Is the website already done, or?
Yeah, website's finished. One page is still under construction, which is, well, I guess one whole section, which is the blog section. All the blogs exist currently on YouTube.
Okay.
And the idea is to bring them onto the website and transcribe them, so that to leverage the SEO that comes with that.
Gotcha. Okay, cool. And there are a couple transcription tools out there too. I don't know what you're doing as far as transcribing them. Is matter like you're gonna manually type that up, or if you're gonna run it through a generator. Okay, I just wanted to make sure. So that's good. I do know a couple times where people have literally gone through and typed every word. Kudos to them for having that motivation, because I would never do that. But yeah, okay, so that's really cool. So as far as YouTube goes, you'll be basically embedding those videos into that page that's currently under construction. Okay, all right, cool.
Yeah.
And that helps too, because it drives views on that YouTube channel as well, in addition to having it embedded, because it is in an iframe. So that works out. I mean, it sounds pretty solid. Do you have any questions regarding that website? Anything that you've struggled with or need to figure out more?
No, not really. It's going to be interesting. I'm going to build it out as a CMS. So there's going to be a master page that, that has
sure.
the new episodes added. It'll then have, a living list of the different episodes.
Right.
That people can then click on to take to a separate page that'll then, have the video, have the transcription, and then whatever other details we want to include for that episode.
Yeah, no, that's great. And yeah, so basically you're going to have the video, and then you're going to have every single episode, or just more like this, or is it built in a sequence?
I'd like to have it dynamic, so we can create topics. And I've looked at, for example, more complex CMSs, and by complex I mean out of what I've historically done, which is pretty much nothing. But they'll have, for example, when you scroll down to the bottom of the page, the little thing pops in that says, like, check out this episode, and it then links you to another page that's within the same website for a similar, topic or episode.
Sure.
That's super cool. I'd like to do something like that, but it doesn't need to be over the top. It just needs to, it's primarily for SEO purposes.
No, yeah, for sure. And it works too, that like you said, that secondary click doesn't always happen. Obviously it's more rare, but it's better to have it there than not, because you're right, it makes the page more substantial when it comes to optimization. Now, as far as the CMS goes, something that I've done a couple times is imagine Webflow CMS editor for a second, and you would create 3 fields that are, the dynamic collection list aspect of things. And normally, 3 to 5 is about the right number for that kind of thing, to say, hey, here's a video, or here's 3 that are like this. We do this a lot when we refer to like products on a page, and e-commerce. We say, hey, here's the product you're interested in. Oh, and by the way, here's 3 that are very similar to it, or like it, check it out. So in that dynamic list, have a list of all your or all your videos, not products, and try to go about it that way. But you know, with YouTube, it's a little bit harder, but I have seen it done to where it works pretty well. So yeah, for sure. And then you said pop up. Are you talking about like a light box that comes up, or?
Yeah, I've seen other ones that when you get to like, you know, the last 20% of the page,
Right.
it just slides in.
Gotcha. No, that's great. That's cool. And I actually like that. I've seen it more and more. That activation is really nice. And even don't be scared to have both, you know, to where you have the one slot that slides in that says, you know, oh, you know, check out this video. This one is the next video or whatever. And then you have 3 other ones that hit right there in that last 20%. So let's say you have the slide come in at like 30 or 40%. And then if the user's like, not interested, all right, well, here's 3 more. Maybe you're interested in those. You get what I'm saying? So that might be worth the while. So going back to that question that people were posting as far as planning websites go, getting into the nitty gritty there, I would start drawing out wireframes. I think the general process is you're going to do content research. So dig in on your client as much as you possibly can and figure out every single thing and know their business. Businesses love when you know who they are and what they do. It's interesting. I like saying that web freelancers kind of become the end all be all for every industry, because we really have to learn about different things, whether it be you know, a podiatrist or it be a welder. You never know what industry you're gonna stumble across and who you're helping out. So it's really cool. You get to learn a lot of cool stuff in that regards. But content research is the first step. Second step is wireframes. And wireframes are different than visuals. A lot of people jump right into visuals, and that can be very dangerous. What wireframes establish is the overall layout of something and the grid of the website, but not necessarily what actually goes into that spot. So try not to think about visuals. Try not to think about, oh, you know, I could use a cool image of a girl standing there with her phone right there. Don't think about anything like that. A wireframe is, and I'll kind of show it to you here, a wireframe is basically you building out a piece of content, having a header, and then there's some traditional ways that we go about marking this kind of stuff up. I'm just doing like a simple wireframe real quick that I've seen thousands of times. The general premise, though, is you want to build out all your CTAs, your call to action buttons and everything, and get an idea of where they're going to sit, not necessarily what they're going to say. But once you kind of create a layout based on the content that the person's given you, or in some cases, some companies don't want to give you content. They're like, I want you to come up with it. And that's perfectly fine if that's something that you want to do. But I definitely say charge for it. Never be scared to charge for something that wasn't originally included, even if they don't mention it until after you've already got the contract settled. Always go back and go, oh, you know, that's great. I think that'd be a great idea. Would you like me to put together a quote for that? And that's a good approach to have in that concept, because it doesn't come across as too forceful, and it doesn't come across as being rude and saying, oh, you know, that's going to cost you money or whatever like that. Like, always lead with the assumption that the client knows that they're going to be charged, and be nice about it that way. And 9 times out of 10, they'll go, oh yeah, I guess I do have to pay for that. That's not included. And they won't even debate it with you. They'll be like, all right, you know, that sounds great. Send us up a quote. We'll take a look. And then you can negotiate from there and go from there. So anyways, wireframe wise, this is kind of what we're talking about right here. Let's see if we can get that. I don't know if we can see that. You get what I'm saying though? So the Xed areas right here, and I know the camera is acting a little wonky, but the Xed areas right here are areas where images are gonna lie. And then you have kind of a general format of text or body text. So what I often do is I put a header like this, like as a box with no X, and then you have like lines like this for body paragraphs or any content words, and then another box with lines through it for buttons and that kind of stuff. Any imagery or graphics, just get an X right through the box, just to represent that a visual or an image is going to go there. From wireframes, you go to visuals. Visuals is where you start adding the brand and color of things. And then, of course, a lot of startups too, you have situations to where you have to end up establishing the brand. And that's another charge, you know, so it just depends on what you're doing and how you're doing about it, or how you're going about doing it. And then so visuals are where you would then hop onto the computer at that point and go, okay, this image looks good here. This content would go great here. And obviously you want to make sure that your wireframes are built for the content that you have. Don't just eyeball it and go, oh, this is a pretty layout or this looks good. You want to make sure that all of your wireframes are based on that. And you can go into detail once you kind of establish a general layout, and it's going to take a lot of drawing and a lot of framing up. You'll then start to point arrows to those sections and go, all right, this is where this content's going to go. This should be enough room for it. And then once you nail that down in the wireframe process, then cascade down and start designing the wireframes for, tablet, mobile landscape, and mobile portrait. And then you go into visuals. So you literally, this is why web design costs so much money. A lot of people always ask that question, gosh, that's too high. Why are you charging that? And that's an okay question. Sometimes, we want to be like, what do you mean? But ultimately we kind of have to approach it in the understanding that they don't know what they're talking about, and that's why they've come to us. So in that regards, it's a lot of steps, but it is what it is. Once you get into visuals, you put all that in there and everything. And then you go from there into development. And at each one of these stages, I highly recommend consulting with the client and saying, hey, this is what I got. Don't do it for really content research. You're not showing them what you have. It's just a matter of going over it with them. So, this is kind of what we've established based on your business model, and this is, the content that we're including, and confirm with them at that stage. And then at wireframes, once again, don't show them your wireframes, but simply say, hey, this is the page kind of site index that we're, or site map rather, that we're trying to build out, and how we're going to organize the content that you've given us. And this is what's going to be on each page, and just verbally communicate that with them. You can even do a brief write-up of it, but don't show them your wireframes. And the reason why I say that is because when you show somebody your wireframes, you start to, they don't really see the value in a wireframe, or they start to critique the wireframe when that's really not the final product. You might go through multiple iterations of the visuals before you actually nail down what you think is the right way to go. So you never want to get a client locked in their head on, oh, this is the wireframe that it's going to look like, and that's not looking so good. That's not what the client was thinking. After visuals, that's where you want to meet with the client and go, this is what we got going on. And I would also recommend always taking a look at prototyping at that point. Really go in, Adobe XD, Sketch, anything like that, and start prototyping simple one-to-one clicks for different pages, and show them how that's going to look, and even show them responsiveness. Maybe just on the home page. You don't always have to do it on every page. They typically don't really care too much about responsiveness for all the sub pages. They just want to know that it will be there. So once that's confirmed and they've given their feedback there, you jump right into development and go at it that way. So Cyan, I see that you've posted some questions here. So do you use 12 column formats for wireframing? Not always. I typically use 8. 8 is kind of like my magic number for doing that. 12 is fine, but I wouldn't go any higher than that. 12 columns can be really small, especially when you're talking about the cascading. Even though we want to design for these big, pages or whatever, you got to keep in mind your audience and who's going to be looking at it. And it ultimately depends on the client, right? Are the majority of them on desktop or the majority on mobile? Unfortunately, most people are going to mobile nowadays. It's more fun and pretty to make something look good on desktop. But we have to consider where the majority of the audience is going to be. And it's that battle between form and function, right? Like form, it looks pretty. Function, it needs to do this for the user. This needs to be accomplished. And if they can't accomplish whatever they need to accomplish, the form doesn't matter at that point. Hey, Rohan, how's it going? He's there. Oh, and I saw Naya's there too. Okay, cool. So yeah, I would say 8. 12 is perfectly fine. I see people do it, but I've seen 8 to 10 as more of the average. In the people that I've worked with. Okay, so it's funny that I didn't even see your question about mobile first. That's great. So with mobile first, no, I personally do not design mobile first. I think that it's a great concept, but just simply because a lot of the stuff I work on is on desktop and everything, I like to cascade down. Now, of course, if you're building an application or a mobile application, it's going to be mobile first. There's no, and that's kind of where that originated too, was, okay, apps are on mobile. Why don't we start thinking about, since the majority of users are here, let's design for that. And that's not always the case. So I personally don't like doing mobile first. I think it makes for messy wireframing, because everybody tends to automatically center crap instead of thinking about flush left and everything. And when you start with desktop and you're creating more interesting layouts, you have more of a motivation to continue that interesting layout in the mobile design, opposed to just having everything centered and, all right, here's an image, here's content, and it doesn't work out so well. But to each their own. I know a lot of people that do mobile first and they love it. It's just not me. I don't enjoy it. And it's funny because I do app design all day, but that's besides the point. No, you're good, Naya. That's great. Cool. I'm glad that you joined us and were able to join in on that. That's awesome. So yeah, planning a website, just to kind of wrap that up there. I'd like to get more into development another time, as far as how to go about naming classes and everything. Rohan and I have actually had some really interesting conversations about naming, and I know, Rohan, you've been getting into that as well, and what's the best thing to do. And to be honest, I think that oftentimes we get too caught up in how do we go about doing something instead of actually diving in and doing it. Now, you have to obviously consider the website. Are you passing it off to developers or other developers down the road, and do they understand your naming conventions and everything like that? It depends. I think the best way to do it is to cascade down, and with the subclasses and everything, while it might seem like to do, let me give an example, right? Header section and then title or something like that. You want to say header section and then header section title. Even sub elements need to have that variation attached to them or appended to them. So it just depends on how you go about doing it. Ultimately, whatever system works best for you, use it. Unless you're working on a team, then establish something together. But as long as it makes sense, for the most part, most developers and designers can jump into code and kind of figure out other naming conventions. The fortunate part is CSS class naming doesn't really play a role in SEO or anything. So it doesn't really matter what you put in. It just matters, it doesn't make sense to you. And if you were to go back and change something, would that class name still make sense? So that's the biggest thing for me. And in general, you never want to name something like a class. You never want to name it red title, right? Because what if the brand color changes or something and you come back in, you have a class now that's tied to all these elements and it's called red title. That sucks. You don't want to have to go in and find and replace and do all that. Let's say you're manually doing it. So what I recommend doing is, H1, H2, style it that way. And then once you want to get nittier and grittier, do primary color, secondary color, that kind of stuff, because typically in brands you have primaries and secondaries for everything there. And then getting on to, I think really the last thing we have time to go about, I know is upvoted a lot, is pricing, right? So raise your hand if you hate pricing. Yep, everybody hates pricing. Brian's the only one that raises his hand, which makes it even more fun. So pricing's crazy, pricing sucks. But ultimately, the best way to go about pricing is to establish how much you want to make in a year and what you value as yourself. So I always suggest going, now mind you, I'm in the United States, so I want to make, let's say it's $50,000 a year. And that'll be enough to support me living and support whatever I want to do. Then you're going to break it down from there and figure out exactly how much you need to charge a client based on the number of clients that you have per year. I think that's a great way to go about doing it. Another one is to always look at the industry and standards as far as that goes. I would highly recommend, as far as like minimums, of course it's very dependent. I'll start off by saying, when you go buy a car, how much is the car going to cost? Nobody knows, because we don't know what kind of car it is. And that's a common question that we get is how much is the car going to cost, or how much is the website going to cost, right? And we're like, well, it's very dependent. Same thing goes for trying to establish pricing on your own. Always consider what project you're doing and what's all involved. And like I said before, to Brian and Cyan, don't be scared to jump back in with the client and say, oh yeah, no, I'd love to do that for you. Would you like me to send you over a quote for that as well? And that's always a great way to be able to tack on whatever extra stuff that wasn't originally agreed upon. Don't feel like you have to jump in and do something just because they asked for it and you've already signed a contract and agreed to terms. You can always go, unfortunately, that wasn't in the contract, but we can definitely examine a quote for that.
If I could jump in really quick, Austin, my background's actually in sales, and I have no problem talking with people about money.
That's great.
A really great way, if you're building a complex site for somebody and you're worried that maybe they don't fully understand everything that's going into that price that you're quoting, and you're worried someone else might underbid you and then deliver a terrible website, don't just send the proposal over, give them a call. And before you reveal the price to them, go through everything that goes into that on the phone and explain what would happen if they bought a cheaper website, and then deliver that price. And that way you'll get very little pushback from them. And then when you send through the proposal, it's not a surprise. They don't have sticker shock.
Right. No, I love sticker shock. Yeah, no, that's very true. Thanks for saying that too. What I like to do when I send out invoices or proposals is even on the invoice itself, after you speak with the client about everything that's involved, break it down as much as you can, opposed to just saying, all right, I'm going to build, like go into more detail about each page that you're building out, what's going to be on this page, the difference between static and dynamic pages, because that's more involved too. Always explain that to the client. And yeah, Cyan, you are 100% there. I mean, it doesn't make any sense to not talk with them. I often, if it's an option, even if you have to drive an hour and a half, go sit down with them, have a coffee, talk to them about everything. When they see your face, they're less likely to be so flabbergasted, and they can tell that you're being genuine and not just trying to price gouge them, for sure. So yeah, no, great concept there. Ultimately, when it comes to pricing, minimums, I don't know where you guys sit on minimums, but personally, I don't like designing anything for under $1,000. I think that it's not worth the value. And then when it comes to e-commerce, I don't think that it's honestly worth it to do anything under $10,000. Everything that goes into it, starting from the ground up, I have done e-commerce for people for like $800, and it is not the way to go. It is not worth it. You end up making about $1 or $2 an hour by the time it's all said and done. And it's just, that's not the kind of work we're in. We want to make a profit, and our knowledge is very important, and it is a valuable thing to these customers. So I highly recommend those minimums once you get off the ground. As far as getting experience or gaining experience for a website, a lot of people are like, oh, I don't have experience, so I'm going to charge less. That's an understandable thought, but I think the best way to go about that is don't jump into a client then. If you don't have experience in what you're doing, don't automatically go, all right, I'm ready for the industry, because you're not. What I think you should do is jump back and go, okay, I want to do a redesign on a website that doesn't look that great, or I don't think looks good. Let me do that. And then go to your peers, go to, the Slack channel that we're starting up as well. Go to that and ask for design feedback on that. That way we can compare side by side on what currently exists and what you've done to make it better. And that is considering form and function as well. So highly recommend paying attention to that kind of stuff. But then once you feel like you've kind of navigated it, jump right into clients and get used to that, and then you can continue to raise your price up from those minimums, but I wouldn't go any lower than that. I would never do free work for anybody. I've actually, I have done free work for people, and I highly say I don't think that it's a good idea. You end up spending a lot of time that goes to waste, and you're dealing with the same things you'd be dealing with a normal client, so why not charge them? And you devalue, or you depreciate your value as well when you do free work, or you do stuff that is of lesser cost, because they don't think that you're as good, and oftentimes you run into clients that you don't want to work with, because they don't understand the value of what you're actually doing, and they expect too much. for so little. So, it is a battle, but those are my minimums. Those definitely increase depending on what's involved, but always charge it, separate it between, content strategy, web design and development, and brand design and development, depending on what it is. Never lump that. You can lump it all in, but make sure you're charging each individually for each thing depending on what you're doing for a client. And never feel like copywriting is content and everything is included, because it's not. That content should be given to you, even at a minimum of $10,000 for e-commerce. They should have everything. If you have to go in and fix photos a good amount, I'm not talking about little tweaks here and there, that's expected. But if you have to go in and change things or fix things, then charge for that, and be upfront before you do it. Don't do it and then expect them to automatically pay you for it. Make sure that you go, okay, yeah, I'd love to do this for you. This is how we're going to do it. This is what it would cost, and then go from there. If they don't want it, no big deal. Yes, Cyan. So minimum for e-commerce, I did say 10,000. It's a large number, and it definitely will freak people out. But I wouldn't do it unless you're working with a buddy of yours and you're trying, you gain more out of it than that. It just doesn't end up being worth it. E-commerce jobs can take a really, really long time. Now, if you have all the content in mind and in your hand, and they literally want to make it, and you know that it's going to take you a month or two to do, very rare, but if that happens, then sure, consider a lower value. Obviously, never go under 1,000 at that point. For stuff that's really easy to set up, let's say you're even in the business of doing a simple WooCommerce store or something like that, where it's template based. Feel free to do that. I would say you could probably go down to a minimum of 5,000 at that point. But just coming from experience and how much things are charged in the industry, like I said, you'll end up going way too low because you're scared to go to the right number. So for sure, yeah, 10,000 is minimum there, and then 1,000 is minimum. And those numbers are for me. They're not it's not something that you can go, oh yeah, it's one set value. But I want to at least say that's what I charge. That's the typical amount that I'll put in, unless I see other value in it and I want to be more entrepreneurial, and maybe I take a percentage of the company over in that regard or whatever. Depends on the industry and what you're doing, but ultimately, that's how it all functions. So those were the two biggest questions. So now I'm going to turn it over to you guys. Let's check on time here. Yes, 3:50. Okay. So I'll turn it over to you guys. Ask questions away. I know we've already gotten some questions in. And like I said, Rohan, I'll definitely take a look at that 301 redirect with you here in a second too. But ultimately, what questions do you guys have for me? What questions do you guys have for each other? And let's just kind of dive into it.
My biggest one was, and we already touched on it a little bit, but is naming. Is there maybe a good resource online that kind of lays it out, like best practices for naming all your elements within your websites, to make sure that you don't run into any trouble? There's a system behind it and it's really effective.
Yeah, for sure. No, that's a great question. So just to be more specific here, you're specifically talking about CSS naming classes and that kind of stuff?
Yeah.
Okay. All right. Yeah. So hold on one second. Let me actually, Rohan, you sent me a link in a Facebook message group. Do you mind pulling that link back up?
About the BEM naming convention?
Yep.
All right. Give me a moment.
Thank you so much. Yeah, so Rohan and I were going back and forth a long time ago. Brian, I see you posted that there.
Yeah, so I don't know if that's the same link, but the answer is yes. There are a couple different forms and ways to do that. I think most of these kind of more strict methodologies are definitely structured around sites that are much larger and more complex. Yep. But I think you can kind of take some inspiration from these. And so there's BEM, and then there's object-oriented CSS. And the idea is basically just to kind of break down where those styles apply and what element they apply to. And so I think most people that are kind of just building sort of one-off sites can probably take some inspiration from these. But maybe just kind of then apply your own system, because this is definitely becomes more effective when you're working with a huge team on a huge product and things like that.
For sure. No, that's a good point. Yeah, and Brian's dead on. BEM, BEM, it is great. That was the one that Rohan and I were talking about, and Rohan was looking at. And that's the thing, Cyan. It really depends on what you're doing and how much time you want to put into it. Once you pick up a naming convention, it becomes much quicker. As far as like getting it down, you have to keep in mind the combo class thing on Webflow is a little bit different in how it functions than what, than just like writing straight code. So what I recommend doing, opposed to me trying to explain that, is I would say go in, if you have the Webflow plan to do so, export the code and see what combo classes look like for particular elements and how that functions. Because that also plays into, you might name it a certain way on Webflow's side, but ultimately what it exports is really what matters, because that's what's being injected onto the name server by the time it's all said and done. BIM is good. It's a great concept. It's built on a lot of shorthand and like button is BTN and all kinds of different things. But ultimately, whatever works for you. But yeah, those resources, definitely grab those. Yeah, okay, so Rohan, that was the one, right? So webflow.com has one on BIM as well. And then the one that I have seen multiple times is the CSS tricks one that Brian posted, so that works out great. So definitely take a look at those.
Cool.
First utility approach. So first utility approach, I have done this. The approach is, from what I know, related to like originating when it comes to these CSS libraries that people use. WE3 has one. I don't honestly know. I don't remember if CSS Tricks has one, but there's a couple libraries out there, CSS libraries, where it has this first utility approach that you're talking about, to where the classes are named a certain way. An example, there's color names, there's margin names, there's padding names, there's text like font size names, et cetera, the list goes on. Personally, unless you're using it as a library, I don't recommend doing it all the time. I think that there's only a couple instances where you will do it. Margin is a good one when you're trying to center something out. If you want to just, call it margin centered to where it adds, auto and all that, that might be worth it. Things that you repetitively use might be worth it, but ultimately, I don't recommend doing it. I've always done the opposite approach, to where it's more based on specific elements on a page. But to be honest, Rohan, it might be worth exploring a combination of both, to where you have the first utility approach on certain aspects of design and development within your page, but ultimately still have classes that are built out for specific sections. Because the last thing that you want to do is have like 20 classes added to one section. If you could just create one class for that section and give it everything that it needs, then it's cleaner code, to me at least, and B, it's easier to understand and to go back and change later on. Because when you're trying to figure out what all is attached to one element, it can become a pain in the derriere. So I don't recommend it. The smaller the amount of classes you can have, the better. But if it's something as easy as going, this element really needs an extra 10 pixels of margin, instead of going in and trying to create another class for it, just add a combo class or add, a secondary class to it that gives it that 10 pixels. And in that instance, using that approach might be worth. Okay, so Cyan, I see your question. Last question, when to use different unit types: pixels, percentage, VH, EM, etc. Yeah, the list is continuing to go on as we speak, for sure. Okay, so great question, cool stuff. Percentages were originally built on the concept of responsiveness. When that all started to come into play, originally we used tables, and you would only talk about like pixels, right? It depends specifically on certain situations, so I'll give you those situations now. When you do absolute positioning a lot, you have to give a pixel height or a specific height with that. So when doing absolute positioning, I normally always give a pixel amount, opposed to doing percentage, viewer height or anything. Viewer height versus viewer width is often used when you're dealing with fixed elements on a page or sticky elements on a page. So such as a lot of times VH is specifically used when dealing with a header section at the very top of the home page, because you want, like, let's say the full thing that they see is that picture of, maybe it's a project that you did or whatever it might be. If it's a portfolio site, you want them to see that whole thing and you don't really want it to be cropped. That's an instance of using that. And you kind of want things to act a little modular and almost like an app more than a website. That's when viewer height and viewer width, or just viewer height specifically, is often used. Viewer width, you have to keep in mind the difference between the viewport and 100%, right? There's a huge difference there in how they function. Viewport isn't always like, you have to think about when you minimize and maximize a window and what the viewport actually is. That is taken into consideration. 100% is specifically of that div or the element that it's in, whereas viewport is the whole thing. So if I have an element within a div and I give it 100% viewport, it's going to blow outside of that div to make sure it fits 100% the viewport. But then it's going to accept things like margin left and everything as well. So you have an issue, especially you see it a lot on mobile with sites that haven't really been made responsive yet, to where they drag side to side because they have content going off the screen on the side of it. So be careful with using VW. Highly recommend using 100% and making sure that the divs are set to 100% of the body specifically. No, Brian's gone. But thanks, Brian. No worries there. I have my girlfriend's dog in my lap, if you couldn't tell. He's a pain. So ultimately, I think that is a good answer there. EM is great for thinking about responsive type. When you want type to scale up and down on a page, that's when EM can be very handy, opposed to going in and creating different cascading media queries for type. If you can just knock it out in an EM value, that's where that all kind of started, was in type specific. Ultimately, I use percentages a lot. I think percentages are great to have. Dude, sit down, stop. I think percentages are great to have and utilize a lot, and especially so I'll give you an instance where I've used viewport height. I do like a menu on the side sometimes. You see them more and more now, to where you have a vertical menu that's fixed to the viewport on the side of the screen. That's where you would want to use 100 VH or something like that, because it makes sure that no matter what the viewport is, it scales responsively that way. Ultimately, utilizing things like Flexbox really killed out some of VH and VW over time, and then Grid as well. So does that answer your question?
Yeah, definitely. I just, the last part of it was, and I'm guessing percentages probably takes care of this, but is there kind of a best practices approach to use these different units in order to ensure that once you built it out on desktop, it then scales down to mobile really, really effectively?
Yes.
So that it minimizes the amount of revisions you have to make.
Yes, for sure. There is. And I think that in particular, to answer that question, geez, I wish my camera would stop shaking, is what people often do, and I think the best practice for combining pixel and percentage is a max pixel width, and then you set, so let's say you set the width of an element to 100%, and then you set the max width to 800 pixels. What that's going to do is it's going to tell that specific div that no matter how big this window gets, it's only going to be 800 pixels wide. You do that a lot because you don't want these giant long paragraphs spanning the entire screen. It condenses it and makes it more legible. So considering things like that, I think that's the most common tie between the two, to where it's 100% width, so that when you scale down on mobile, it's taking up that full frame and not getting down. Like, let's say I set the width instead to 50% or something to try to compensate for that on desktop. It won't look good on mobile, and you'll have to create some media queries for that. So instead, what you would do is set it to 100% width with a max value, so that it doesn't cap out. And that's just thinking, working smarter, not harder, when it comes to building out responsive layouts and working with media queries.
Nice. Yeah, that makes a ton of sense. That's really helpful.
Perfect.
I I think Naya had a question that got lost in the feed here.
Yeah, Naya. Okay, let me. So I'm really interested. Oh yeah, I definitely missed this on how well Webflow self-hosting works. As in, when you export code and host on a service like Netlify or Firebase, do you have any experience? Yes. So ultimately, I think it's really based on the client, not so much based on you. It's also based on your approach, though. If you are comfortable with exporting code and hosting it elsewhere, do it. But that depends on what you want to do. Clients might ask you or might demand. I have had clients demand that their site be hosted on WordPress, even though I have convinced them that Webflow, or done the best that I can do to convince them otherwise. They still want to host it on WordPress, which WordPress is what it is. It's its whole beast in and of itself, and it works great for what it is supposed to do. But ultimately, so you can export the code and host it elsewhere. I think Udesly is another thing to grab if you haven't looked into that yet. Udesly is a company, a third-party plugin basically that started up and directly works with Webflow sites to export the code in a specific format. You're going to have to really pay attention to their documentation, but ultimately to be able to host it on WordPress and I think even Shopify at this point, and a couple of other things. So that makes it easier. I personally don't feel like Webflow's e-commerce is where it is or where it needs to be yet. Although they've made some extreme leaps and bounds. That would be one example of exporting more like design code and then jumping into Shopify and continuing the e-commerce CMS there until Webflow gets everything kind of full-fledged and flushed out. But for sure, it happens. Self-hosting is worth it. I actually have two plans. I have a plan to where it's for building out websites for client, and then I have a self-hosted plan specifically for my portfolio website. So just to differentiate the two, I think that's the best way to go. But keep in mind that when you hop into a designer plan on Webflow, you're building websites for others, whereas if you're designing a self-host website, that's more for yourself. You can always set up self-host websites for the clients, but that defeats the purpose of kind of retaining those customers as time goes on if you want to retain them and continue to charge them a monthly charge or whatever it is for your services. And you can also bill things out directly from Webflow for each individual process or part of the project. Things are more maintained there for like a client perspective than so just building a website for yourself. So I hopefully that answers your question, Naya. Let me know if it doesn't, and I'd be glad to elaborate on that. But other than that, I'll give, if there's any final thoughts, any questions. I think that this went relatively well as far as just talking things out and helping out. Let's see. Do you know if Webflow can be used to design the front end of a software? Hand over the code to the developers. Great question. Okay, so Webflow is specifically built out to design for, to establish HTML, CSS, and JavaScript and nothing more. So ultimately, it's not really meant for like software development like that. It'd be better. Okay, so to be honest, I wouldn't jump to Webflow at that point. If you're trying to design a software for somebody, go to Adobe XD, go to InVision Studio, go to Sketch and use those platforms and prototype within those platforms, because it's a lot of wasted time, building out, actually developing things than it is just working with Sketch or XD. And you have to keep in mind too, products like XD and everything have libraries now, cloud libraries, to where developers can hop on. InVision Studio has that. Framer X, it has come a long way recently, and they're more developer based when it comes to what is it called, React and everything for prototyping and passing that information off to developers. So use a software like that. Don't use Webflow. In my personal opinion, that's not what it's for. So that's that. And then if I had, I had someone ask for a website, but they mentioned they don't want it hosted on Webflow, but will need updates a few times a year. Also, thanks to a person who caught my message. Thank you, Cyan, for catching a message. But they mentioned they don't want it hosted on Webflow, but will need update. Yeah, so Naya, if they don't want it hosted on Webflow, if you haven't done so already, try to convince them that it's worth working with Webflow. I have a great SEO link. I know that's been a concern a lot, is Yoast, right? Yoast is used a lot on WordPress sites. Everybody freaks out and thinks it's this great thing, and it is. Don't get me wrong. It's a great tool, but Webflow, if used correctly, can do just that, if not more, and it's more fruitful in the end as far as ranking your website better. So if you haven't done so already, try to convince them. I'll send you a couple links, show it to them. If not, be like, no, listen, it's totally cool. Let's then we can build it out on WordPress, and then take a look at Udesly at that point. I think it's like $30 or something for you to get started with Udesly and converting a site from that to WordPress. And that'll get the design up and running to where you can kind of create a template for them and then continue to function and make updates on WordPress specifically. So, sweet. Well, cool. What do you see? That's such
if we're out of time, don't worry about it. I just figured since it sounds like we're wrapping up, I would be curious to hear your thoughts on this.
Yeah. Okay. So what do you see for the future of Webflow? That's a great question. So they have the No Code conference that's about to roll out. I don't know if you've seen anything on that, but if you haven't, look it up. It's kind of a cool concept. To me, Webflow is the only one out there right now that has perfectly merged development and design. And they've done it so well that I foresee a future that is just strictly design based, to where when we design something, it works. And it's a matter of, there might be a couple tweaks that we have to make here and there on the development aspect of things, because that will still exist. That's never going to go anywhere. But ultimately, it has come a long way from just sitting down with a code editor or a text editor and trying to code it that way. Immediate future, I see e-commerce becoming a huge thing. I foresee that really taking off, and I'm curious to see if Shopify starts to lose some business because of Webflow in that regard. Specifically for people that are designing, mind you, Webflow is specifically for people that are designing websites for other people. That's why it was established. It's not something like Shopify where you have a business coming and saying, I want to do something for myself, because most of the time they don't know how to deal with divs and link blocks and all that kind of stuff. But ultimately, I think I'm curious to see where Webflow is headed when it comes to app design. I'm curious where that'll be headed as far as like building an app on Webflow and actually pushing it to Apple stores and Google Play Store and all kinds of stuff like that. As far as when that would happen, gosh, it could be 10 years. I don't think we're anywhere close to it right now. Their focus, from what I can tell, is a lot on e-commerce and getting that up off the ground. And also the whole Lottie thing that's happening right now with animations is huge. Check it out if you haven't. That is great. Really creating these custom interactions that go well beyond Interaction 2.0 that Webflow has. Learn After Effects. I know some people have been hesitant, even some of the conversations that I've had. People are hesitant of After Effects. I totally get it. It is a beast. And it's not like a bicycle. It's not a case of you learn it and you're good. You have to keep using it, and you have to keep evolving with the software. But there's so many things out there. Lynda.com, which has now become LinkedIn.com. Skillshare is great for After Effects. I've seen a lot of really cool Skillshare websites. And then go to YouTube. Crap, most of the stuff I do in After Effects I learned from YouTube, to be honest. So there's a lot of free sources out there that I would recommend. And then let's see, 100% their end game is to be able to make real web apps, but that's probably more long-term. Right, yeah. So, I definitely am there, Ryan. Great question. You like this thread by levels. Was a great read for no-code folks. Yeah, so also I just saw someone built an HRITS system fully on Webflow. That's crazy. See, it's funny, and you have to balance like what's worth building on Webflow and what's worth going somewhere else. So that's a whole nother discussion. Sometimes, if you're not developer savvy and you don't know how to code a lot of the different languages, it's more worth it, to be honest, to hire a developer at that point and let them take over that side of things. Be very stringent on the design and how it's supposed to look and function, because developers are not keen to pay attention to kerning or leading or background color or anything like that. They often mess that up, and I'm not saying that's their fault. That's who they are. But definitely worth hiring a developer for some of this stuff that, especially when you're adding web apps to your Webflow site, it might be worth to pull somebody in for that, for, even like high level advanced analytics or something at that point. Highly recommend doing that kind of stuff. And don't always feel like you have to do it all yourself. Build a team, and that's really what this whole thing's about, right? Is building a team and knowing who the key players are here and moving forward with that and growing and evolving with everybody. So, yeah, if you can share that, Naya. Naya, are you part of the Slack channel yet?
I don't think she has a microphone.
That's no, yeah, I know. Okay, so she said no, yeah. No worries. Okay, so if you can be, that would be great. Definitely, I'd love to see that link there too. For the most part, though, if anybody needs to copy any links or anything, feel free to. I'm also going to post a whole recording of this as well that'll have those links in that. I've kept the Zoom chat up the entire time while we've talked. So for the most part, I think we're good here. I am more than welcome. If there's any other questions anybody has, go ahead and post them and I'll be happy to help. But other than that, I think it's been very productive. And then too, if y'all have any feedback for how this has gone or things that you would like to see differently about this, totally open to it. It was just kind of, a last minute thing that I wanted to start up. So I'd love to see where this thing goes. Even thinking about branding and doing some cool stuff with that. And then also like guest speakers potentially later on too, having some fun people come in that are just involved in the community and getting that out there. Of course, I'm based out of Atlanta, Georgia. I know that we're all around everywhere. So, also feel free in the Slack channel, drop where you are. It's really cool to see where everybody's from and what everybody's doing. And like I said, I'll also get those projects set up to where we have design feedback and everything going on. And then for those that are watching the recording now, make sure you check out that Slack channel. I'll repost the invite with this recording in the actual Facebook group. And, join the Slack channel. It'll be a great way for us to communicate to where we're not bothering everybody within the Webflow group on everything that's going on with this. So definitely can have this again, Rohan. Like I previously mentioned, I'm wanting to work on getting this, as like a bi-weekly thing, might even move it into weekly depending on availability, just with everything going on. But ultimately, I think it's great. It's great for conversation. And hearing everybody kind of step up and get involved too on what's going on with them is awesome too. So awesome, sweet, and no problem, Naya. I'm glad that I could help. Thank you so much, guys, for your time. Hopefully it's been productive. If you have any other questions, I'll be available here for the next hour or so. Feel free to drop them in the Slack channel and we can go from there.